A $5 million necklace, the famed Tesla emeralds, was just clasped around Aria Pierce's throat, a cold, heavy burden of her husband's success. But that's not the gift that mattered. In her hands, she held a small, $50 wooden music box. "What is that?" Her billionaire husband, Arthur Pierce, sneered, his voice cutting through the applause. "Fireplace kindling?" His executive board laughed. Aria flushed, hiding the small box. She didn't know it yet. Arthur didn't know it. But that worthless piece of wood held a secret that was about to liquidate his entire $100 billion empire. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a pressurized gallery. 3,000 square feet of Arctic white marble and glass overlooking Central Park. Every surface was sterile, polished by a staff that moved with the silent, efficient dread of ghosts. This was the world Arthur Pierce had built, or more accurately, the world he had conquered. Arthur, at 48, was the titan of American industry. His company, Pierce Global Dynamics, had its steel and glass fingers in everything from satellite technology to advanced pharmaceuticals. He was a man who didn't just enter a room, he acquired it. His suits were bespoke, his handshake was a contract, and his smile was a press release. Tonight was their 10th anniversary, and the penthouse was suffocating with New York's financial elite. Men with names like Vance, Rothschild, and Chanot milled about, their voices a low hum of acquisitions and stock options. His wife, Aria Pierce, stood slightly apart from the main cluster. Where Arthur was sharp-edged steel, Aria was soft-grained wood. She was a Sinclair, an old money family whose wealth had faded from billions to mere millions, but whose name still unlocked doors Arthur's new money could only kick down. She was an artist, a musician, but her studio on the 3rd floor of their penthouse was mostly kept as a curiosity, a charming hobby, Arthur would point out to his guests. "To 10 years, my love," Arthur boomed, silencing the room. He produced a long, velvet box from the house of Leviev. He opened it. The gasp from the room was audible. Inside, nestled on white silk, was the Tesla emerald necklace. It was a staggering piece of history, rumored to have been carved for Russian royalty and recently auctioned at Sotheby's for a sum that could have funded a small country. "Arthur, it's too much," Aria whispered, her hand rising to her throat. The emeralds were cold as he clasped them around her neck. They felt less like a gift and more like a glittering leash. "Nothing is too much," Arthur declared, kissing her cheek for the cameras from Forbes and Vanity Fair that flashed in the corner. "Only the best." "And what did you get him, Aria?" Marcus Vance, Arthur's shark-like COO, chimed in, a smirk playing on his lips. "How do you top the Tesla emeralds?" Aria's face warmed with a genuine shy smile. "Oh, it's not like that." She signaled to her assistant, who brought over a simple, small box wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with twine. Arthur's smile tightened. He took the package. It was light. He unwrapped it, his movements impatient. Inside was a small, intricately carved wooden music box. It was clearly old, the walnut wood dark and smooth with age, inlaid with a simple, mother-of-pearl depiction of a mechanical bird. It was beautiful, but in this room, surrounded by billions of dollars of net worth, it was an oddity. A dead silence fell. Arthur stared at it. He rotated it in his large hands. He looked at Aria, his eyes flat. "Where did you get this?" "At that little antique shop in the village," Aria said, her voice small. "Curio and Cog on Mercer Street. I was walking last week and I heard it. The tune was, well, I thought it was beautiful." Arthur let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a sound of humor, It was a sound of dismissal. "A music box," he said, holding it up for Marcus Vance to see. "From a junk shop." Marcus chuckled obligingly. "Charming, Arya. Very rustic." "What did it set you back, darling?" Arthur asked, his voice dangerously light. $50? 75? Arya flinched as if struck. "Arthur, that's not the point. I thought it was special. It has an inscription." Arthur squinted at the bottom. "Indeed. For M, from G finem respis. Latin. Look to the end. How quaint. Perhaps it's good for fireplace kindling on a cold night." The laughter that followed was sharp, a polite echo of their CEO's cruelty. Arya felt the blood drain from her face. The Tesla emeralds on her neck suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She saw the pitying look from Marcus Vance's wife, the dismissive glance from the Forbes reporter. She had tried to give him something real. He had responded by putting a price tag on it and finding it wanting. "Excuse me," Arya whispered, her voice trembling. She turned, walking quickly past the waiters, past the massive Joan Mitchell painting in the foyer, and down the hall to her studio. Arthur watched her go, his jaw tight with irritation. "A little sensitive tonight," he announced to the room. He tossed the worthless music box onto a side table next to a stack of cocktail napkins, where it sat, small and ignored. "Now," Arthur said, turning back to his guests, his focus already shifted. "Marcus, I want to talk about Helios Innovations. I want that company, and I want it by the end of the quarter." In her studio, Arya locked the door. She slid to the floor, the cold marble seeping through her designer gown. She was crying, not for the humiliation, but for the stark, cold realization that her husband didn't see her. He saw nothing but balance sheets. She had left the music box, but the haunting, simple melody she'd heard in the shop lingered in her mind. It was a tune that would soon become the anthem of her husband's destruction. For the next 2 days, the penthouse was a war room. Arthur Pierce lived on black coffee and a palpable sense of aggression. The object of his desire was Helios Innovations, a cutting-edge biotech firm run by a man who was Arthur's polar opposite, Julian Thorne. Where Arthur was a brute force predator, Julian Thorne was a ghost. He was young, brilliant, and had built Helios from a Silicon Valley garage into a $30 billion market leader in genetic sequencing technology. Thorne was proving infuriatingly resistant to Arthur's hostile takeover bid. "He's rejecting the offer?" "On what grounds?" Arthur snarled, pacing his glass-walled office. The Tesla emeralds sat in their box on his desk, an expensive paperweight. "He's not just rejecting it, Arthur," Marcus Vance said, his face pale, tapping on his tablet. "He's filed an injunction. He's claiming patent infringement." Arthur stopped dead. "What? That's impossible. Our entire pharmaceutical division is built on the PGD Alpha patent. It's ironclad. My father filed it himself in 1985. "Apparently," Marcus said, reading. "Thorne claims to have antecedent proof of prior art. He's saying the patent, our founding patent, was based on stolen research." "A bluff!" Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. "He's desperate. He's trying to buy time. Crush him. Use the legal team. Bury him in fees. And raise the offer another $10 billion. Bleed him out." "He's not a man who bleeds, Arthur," Marcus warned. "He's not after money. He's different." "Everyone has a price," Arthur snapped. "Find his." While Arthur plotted his corporate war, Arya sought refuge in her studio. The morning after the party, a staff member had quietly and discreetly placed the small wooden music box on her work table. It had been rescued from the cocktail napkins, a tiny piece of flotsam saved from the tide of her husband's disdain. She hated what it represented, her humiliation. But as she sat in the quiet morning light, her hands covered in charcoal from a sketch, she found herself drawn to it. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. The craftsmanship was remarkable. The mother-of-pearl bird seemed to shimmer. She found the small brass window key on the side and turned it. A tiny, complex mechanism whirred to life. The music began. It wasn't a simple nursery rhyme. It was a complex, melancholic melody, a minor key waltz that felt more like Chopin than a child's toy. It was haunting, and it filled the sterile room with a profound sense of history. As she listened, she saw the inscription again. 4M, from G, Finem Respis. "Look to the end," she murmured. She was a trained musician. The tune was unusual. It had a strange, repeating 12-note sequence that seemed almost deliberate, almost mathematical. She pulled out a sheet of staff paper and began to transcribe the notes. Across town, in a nondescript office in the meatpacking district, Julian Thorne sat across from a man in a rumpled suit. The man, Mr. Davis, was a private investigator, a specialist in corporate archaeology. "You're sure?" Julian asked. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. "It took some doing," Davies said, sipping lukewarm coffee. The paper trail was almost 40 years old, but the shop owner, a fellow named Finch at Curio and Cog, keeps meticulous records. He bought the contents of a storage unit last month, a unit that had been delinquent since 1990. "Whose unit was it?" Julian asked, his voice tense. "A woman named Miranda Mercer. Died in 89. The unit was full of old papers, lab notes, and one music box." Julian Thorne's eyes snapped up. "The box? He sold it?" 2 days ago. To a woman who paid cash. He didn't get a name," Davies said, but he remembered her. "Classy," he said. Sad eyes. She was wearing a Sinclair family crest ring. "I did a little digging." Davies slid a photograph across the table. It was a paparazzi shot from the previous night's party, blurry but unmistakable. It was Aria Pierce, diamonds glittering at her throat, her husband's arm possessively around her. Julian stared at the photo. Aria Pierce. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The one object in the world that could destroy Arthur Pierce was sitting in his own home, bought by his own wife. "What is this thing, Mr. Thorne?" Davies asked. "You've had me chasing a ghost for 6 months. What's so special about a music box?" Julian stood up, walking to the window. He looked downtown, toward the towering monolith of the Pierce Global Dynamics headquarters. "Mr. Davies," Julian said, his voice quiet. "You haven't been chasing a ghost. You've been chasing a birthright. That music box isn't a toy, it's a key." "A key to what?" Julian turned, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire. "The grave of Arthur Pierce's father, and the resurrection of mine." The injunction from Helios Innovations hit Pierce Global Dynamics like a torpedo. The markets reacted instantly. Their stock, usually as stable as bedrock, dipped 12 points. Arthur was in a state of controlled fury. "Who the hell is Julian Thorne?" He roared at his legal team, a row of 2,000 an hour lawyers who suddenly looked very small. "Where did he come from?" "He's clean, Arthur," replied his general counsel. "MIT at 16, PhD in bioengineering at 20, built Helios with his own seed money. He's considered a visionary. The board at Helios is loyal to him, not the share price. They believe in his mission." "His mission is to lose," Arthur retorted. "This prior art claim." "What is it?" "That's the problem. It's sealed. The judge granted his motion to keep the evidence private, citing extreme corporate sensitivity. We can't fight what we can't see." "Then find me Mr. Finch from Curio and Cog," Arthur commanded an assistant. "Now." While her husband scrambled, Aria found herself doing the one thing she hadn't done in years. She left the penthouse alone. She took a cab, Not the private car, down to Greenwich Village. The bell above the door of Curio and Cog tinkled, a cheerful analog sound in a digital world. The shop was a wonderful dusty maze of forgotten objects. Clocks ticked out of sync, stacks of books formed precarious towers, and the air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. "Mr. Finch?" Aria called out. A man with a shock of white hair and glasses perched on his nose emerged from behind a towering grandfather clock. "Ah, Mrs. Pierce. Or, no, you're a Sinclair, aren't you? You have your mother's eyes." Aria was taken aback. "You know who I am?" "Of course. I knew your grandfather. He sold me a rather lovely astrolabe in '78, Mr. Finch said, wiping his hands on an apron. "You're here about the music box." It wasn't a question. "I am," Aria said. "You told me it belonged to an inventor." "Gabriel Mercer," Finch supplied, his eyes sharp. "A name lost to time. A brilliant man. A tragic man. He and his wife, Miranda. They were patrons of this shop, back when my father ran it. Miranda loved mechanical birds." "What happened to him?" Aria asked, tracing the inlaid bird on the box she'd brought with her. Finch's face darkened. "He was betrayed, robbed, not of money, but of ideas. He was partners with a man who saw the future in Gabriel's work, but didn't want to share the credit." "Who was his partner?" Mr. Finch polished a silver locket. "A man with a legacy, a man who built an empire on another's foundation. His name was Richard Pierce." Aria's blood ran cold. Richard Pierce, her father-in-law. "My husband's father," she whispered. "Indeed," Finch said quietly. "Richard Pierce founded his company on Gabriel Mercer's patents. Mercer was bankrupted, pushed out, and died in obscurity. His wife, Miranda, held on to this box. It was the last thing he ever made for her. She said it held the truth. Finum respice. Look to the end." "I suppose the end is finally here." Aria felt dizzy. She leaned against a bookshelf. "What truth?" "I do not know," Finch said, "but Gabriel was a genius with mechanics, ciphers, puzzles. He believed the world was just one beautiful, complex machine. That box, it's more than a song, young lady. I'd wager my life on it." Aria left the shop in a daze. Richard Pierce, her husband's sainted, ruthless father, the man the business school at Yale was named after, was a thief. She returned to the penthouse. The atmosphere was toxic. Arthur was on the phone, screaming. "I don't care what it costs. By the judge, by his clerks. I want that injunction lifted." He slammed the phone down, his face a mask of purple rage. He turned and saw Aria. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "Out," she said, her voice quiet. "Out." "Out?" He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I am in the middle of a war, a $30 billion war, and you are out. Don't you understand what's at stake? My company, our company, the very thing that pays for your little art hobby, is under attack, and you're buying trinkets." His eyes fell on the music box in her hands. That thing," he seethed. "It's a symbol of your naivety. You live in a fantasy world, Aria, while I live in the real one, the one where men like Julian Thorne are trying to tear me to pieces." "Perhaps he has a reason," Aria said, her voice shaking but finding a new, hard edge. Arthur's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" I said. "Perhaps he has a reason. I went to the shop, Arthur. I spoke to Mr. Finch. He told me about Gabriel Mercer." The colour drained from Arthur's face. For the first time since she'd known him, Arthur Pierce looked afraid. "You don't know what you're talking about," he whispered. "Don't I?" Aria shot back, her humiliation from the party transmuting into cold anger. Richard Pierce's partner, the man he pushed out, The man whose research formed the PGD Alpha patent." "It's a lie," Arthur said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Slander from a jealous rival." "Is it?" Arya asked. "Or is it the prior art Julian Thorne is using against you? Is that why you're so terrified of him?" Before he could answer, his assistant burst in. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a Mr. Julian Thorne in the lobby. He's here to see Mrs. Pierce." Arthur and Arya froze, the accusation hanging in the air between them, thick and toxic. "He's here," Arthur stammered, his mind racing. "For you." This was a move he hadn't anticipated. Thorne wasn't just attacking his company, he was at his door. "Get rid of him. Tell him she's not here." "He says he won't leave, sir," the assistant said, wringing his hands. "He said to tell Mrs. Pierce it's regarding a recent acquisition from Curio and Cog." The music box. It all came back to the music box. "Let him up," Arya said, her voice firm. "Arya, no." Arthur grabbed her arm. "You will not meet with him. This is a corporate negotiation. You are out of your depth." Arya pulled her arm free. "You mocked my trinket, Arthur. You called it kindling. You were furious that I was out while you were at war. It seems my trinket is the one thing your enemy wants. That doesn't sound like I'm out of my depth. It sounds like I'm holding the weapon." She looked at the terrified assistant. "Let him up." While they waited for the private elevator to ascend 80 floors, Arya's mind raced. What did Thorne want? Why did he know she had the box? She looked down at the box in her hands. Finum respice. She ran her fingers over the inlaid mother-of-pearl bird. It was beautiful, but one of the feathers on its wing was slightly raised. It wasn't a flaw, it was a catch. "Arya, whatever he offers you, whatever he says," Arthur began, trying to regain control. "Be quiet," she ordered. She pressed the tiny, raised piece of pearl. With a faint, oiled snick, a section of the box's base popped open, revealing a hidden compartment, no bigger than a matchbook. Arthur's eyes widened. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, were 2 items. One was a small, ornate skeleton key, the kind for a jeweler's box or a diary. The other was a tiny, folded piece of vellum paper, yellowed with age. Arya's hands trembled as she unfolded the note. The iron gall ink was faded, but legible. "My dearest M, he has taken it all. RP has stolen my work, my company, my name. But he cannot steal my mind. He thinks the patent he filed is the original. He is wrong. This key and the melody of your box would protect the true Patent 0. The melody is the map. The key opens the vault. He has left us with nothing. So I leave this for our future. It is a seed from which a new tree will grow, one that will one day overshadow his forest of lies. Look to the end. Forever, your G." Arya read it aloud. The silence in the room was absolute. "Patent 0, Arthur breathed, the words catching in his throat. The map?" Arya looked at the staff paper where she had transcribed the melody. The sequence of 12 notes. It wasn't a tune. It was a code. The ding of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse. Julian Thorne stepped out. He was not what Arthur had expected. He wasn't a corporate raider. He was young, perhaps 30, with a lean, ascetic face and eyes that held an unnerving intelligence. He was wearing a simple black turtleneck and slacks, looking more like a professor than a billionaire. He ignored Arthur completely. His gaze locked onto Arya, and then, with an intake of breath, onto the music box and the vellum note in her hand. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, his voice calm and clear. "My name is Julian Thorne, though the name I was born with was Julian Mercer Thorne." Arthur stumbled back. "Mercer?" Gabriel Mercer was my grandfather, Julian said, his eyes never leaving Arya. My mother was his only child. I see you have found his final letter. I have been searching for that box my entire life. It contains, as you now know, the key to my family's legacy, and the evidence of your family's crime. This is a shakedown, Arthur blustered, his voice betraying his panic. You come into my home, you make these wild accusations. I have made no accusations, Julian said, taking a step closer to Arya. Only your husband seems to think this is an accusation. I see it as a statement of fact. He looked at Arya, his expression softening. He told my grandmother, Miranda, that the box was his revenge, a time bomb set to go off long after he was gone. He trusted that one day someone would be clever enough to find the key and smart enough to read the music. He nodded toward the staff paper on Arya's piano. You're a musician. You've already transcribed it. It's a code, Arya said, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, Julian said. The 12 notes, a passcode to a private depository. The vault he mentions in his note. Arthur looked at the note, at the key, at the man who was threatening to destroy him. His empire, his name, his entire life was balanced on the edge of a $50 music box. What do you want? Arthur demanded, his voice raw. Julian finally turned to Arthur, his gaze turning to absolute ice. Want? I want justice. I want the world to know that Richard Pierce was a thief and that Gabriel Mercer was the true father of the digital age. I want the company he stole. He turned back to Arya. But what I need, Mrs. Pierce, is that key. And that melody. You are holding in your hand a piece of paper that is worth, quite literally, more than your husband's entire company. Because it proves that Pierce Global Dynamics is not, and never was, his company to begin with. The penthouse, usually a bastion of Arthur's power, had become a courtroom. Arya stood at the center, holding the note and the key. Arthur, for the first time, was powerless. Julian Thorne was the prosecutor, judge, and jury. This is insane, Arthur said, though the denial was weak. He was a man watching his own execution being planned. My father was a visionary. Your father, Julian countered, his voice sharp as a scalpel, was an accountant. My grandfather was the visionary. He was a physicist, a man who saw quantum mechanics not as a theory but as a toolbox. He trusted the wrong person. Julian walked over to the glass wall overlooking the city. Let me tell you a story, a real-life story, as you might say. He began to paint a picture of a time long past, of the 1980s, when the digital revolution was just dawning. Begin flashback sequence. The scene. A cluttered garage in Palo Alto, 1984. It smells of ozone and solder. 2 men are hunched over a breadboard. One is Gabriel Mercer, thin, energetic, with wild hair and a mind that moves at the speed of light. The other is a younger, leaner Richard Pierce, sharp, ambitious, with the eyes of a hawk. This is it, Richard. This is it. Gabriel is vibrating with excitement. He holds up a silicon wafer. It's not just a faster processor. It's a predictive algorithm. It can model genetic sequences. It can predict market fluctuations. It's everything. Richard's eyes are not on the wafer. They are on the notebooks, stacks and stacks of them, filled with Gabriel's frantic, brilliant equations. It's revolutionary, Gabe, Richard says, placing a hand on his partner's shoulder. But it's too big for this garage. We need capital, real capital. Let me handle the business. You just keep dreaming. Gabriel smiles, trusting. Whatever you say, Richard. We're partners. The scene shifts. A sterile law office, 1985. Richard Pierce is sitting alone with a team of lawyers. He has Gabriel's notebooks. We file the PGD Alpha patent under Pierce Global Dynamics, a new entity, Richard instructs. Mercer's name is not on it. His contributions were as a work-for-hire consultant. His contract is terminated, effective immediately. But his work is the entire foundation, a young lawyer says. His work, Richard says, his voice cold, was a disorganized mess. I refined it. I made it viable. I am the architect. He was just the bricklayer. File it. The final scene. A rainy street, 1986. Gabriel Mercer is standing outside the brand-new gleaming Pierce Global Dynamics tower. He is holding an eviction notice. He is locked out of his lab, his company, his life. "Richard!" he shouts, but Richard Pierce's limousine slides past, not even slowing down. Gabriel is left in the rain, a broken man. End flashback sequence. Julian turned back from the window. The silence in the room was heavy. "My grandfather sued," Julian continued, his voice heavy with the weight of generations. He spent every last penny he had. But Richard Pierce had better lawyers. He had the filed patent. My grandfather had notebooks, which Richard claimed were consulting notes. The court sided with the filed patent. It bankrupted my grandfather. It destroyed his reputation. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. My grandmother, Miranda, held on to his final legacy. That box, that key, that melody. Aria looked at the tiny key in her palm. It represented a life's work, stolen. "My entire life," Julian said, "has been dedicated to this. I didn't want to just be rich. I had to be smarter. I had to build a company so innovative that I could finally get close enough to the sun to burn it. Helios Innovations was my weapon. The injunction was just to get his attention. But I never dreamed the time bomb itself would show up in his own house." Arthur finally collapsed into a $100,000 Eames chair. He looked old. The Titan was a hollow shell. "My father," he whispered. "He told me Mercer was unstable, that he tried to steal from him. My whole life, my whole legacy, is a lie," Julian finished. "And the proof is in that vault, the original partnership agreement, signed by both of them, the original patent drafts, dated and notarized a full year before your father filed his. Patent 0. When that document becomes public, Pierce Global Dynamics will be dissolved. Its assets will be frozen. Every contract it ever signed will be void. It will be the single largest corporate collapse in human history." Julian looked at Aria, his gaze intense. "That is what you are holding, Mrs. Pierce. Not just the truth. You are holding the pin of a grenade that will wipe this building, this company, and this man's entire existence off the map." Aria's hand closed tightly around the key and the note. She looked at her husband. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading terror. He wasn't a titan. He was just a man who had inherited a lie and lived it with gusto. "Aria," Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking. "Don't. Please. We can make a deal. Thorne, name your price. $1 billion. $10 billion. What do you want?" Julian laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "What do I want? I already told you. I want everything. And she," he nodded at Aria, "is going to give it to me." "Am I?" Aria asked, her voice quiet but clear. Both men stopped it. They looked at her. The power, which had resided with Arthur and then with Julian, had finally settled on her. "This is your family's legacy, Mr. Thorne," she said. "And this is my husband's." She said the word with a new distaste. "You both have a claim, but I am the one holding the key." She turned to Arthur. "You mocked this gift. You mocked me. You built your life on a stolen foundation, and you treated everyone, including me, as assets to be managed or dismissed. She turned to Julian. And you want to destroy it all. 100,000 people work for PGD. Their lives, their pensions, their families. You would burn them all to the ground just to prove your grandfather was right? They are employed by a criminal enterprise, Julian said, his jaw tightening. They are people, Arya countered. My grandfather always said justice and revenge are two different things. What you're seeking, it feels a lot like revenge. Arya took a deep breath. She looked at the staff paper on her piano. The melody. The map. You said it was a passcode. 12 notes. A 12-digit number. My grandmother believed so, Julian said. But she could never figure out the sequence. She wasn't a musician. I am, Arya said. She walked to the piano. The 12-note sequence. It's a tone row. A musical theory concept. But the map isn't the notes themselves. It's the intervals between them. She sat down and played the 12 notes. The haunting melody filled the room. C, F, E flat, A, G, D. A perfect fourth up, she murmured. A major second down, a tritone up. She wrote down the intervals. Pulse 5, 2, pulse 6. It was a string of numbers. That's not a passcode, Arthur said, clutching at straws. It's meaningless. It's not meaningless, Arya said, her eyes lighting up. She walked to her desk, which held an old leather-bound book, the Sinclair family registry. Her family hadn't just been old money. They had been bankers. Her great-grandfather had founded the Sinclair Private Depository in 1910. It was an old-world vault bought out by a Swiss bank in the 90s. But the old vaults, they still existed. The vault isn't at a bank, Arya whispered. It's at the Sinclair Depository, and the code, it's not a 12-digit number, it's a sequence for an old mechanical tumbler lock. She looked up, her gaze resolute. I know where the vault is, and I know how to open it, and I will be the one to do it. The air in the penthouse was so thick with tension, it was a physical weight. Arthur Pierce was a ghost in his own home, pacing uselessly as Arya and Julian, two strangers bound by a 40-year-old secret, planned their next move. The Sinclair Depository, Julian said, a note of respect in his voice. It's still there, under the Credit Suisse building on Madison. The legacy vaults, Arya confirmed, her mind working with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. They're not electronic. They're mechanical, grandfathered in. They require two things, a physical key and the alignment sequence for the tumblers. The melody. We go now, Julian stated. No, Arya said, holding up the key. We go on my terms, not as enemies, but as something else. He, Arthur interrupted, jabbing a finger at Julian, is trying to destroy me. He is trying to reclaim what your father stole, Arya snapped. You will be silent. You will come with us, and you will watch. The ride downtown in Arya's black Bentley Mulsanne was the most agonizing 20 minutes of Arthur Pierce's life. He was trapped in the back seat, a prisoner. Arya sat beside him, rigid. Julian Thorne sat opposite, his face an impassive mask. The silence was absolute. Arthur kept looking at Julian. This was the man he had been trying to bleed out, the man he'd dismissed as a desperate annoyance. Now, this man was about to liquidate his entire world. And his wife, his quiet, artistic, trophy wife, was driving the getaway car. The Sinclair Depository was a place out of time. They were escorted by a stern-faced Swiss manager to a private elevator, which descended deep into the bedrock of Manhattan. The air grew cold. The elevator opened onto a long hall of polished marble, illuminated by brass gas lamps. The legacy vaults are temperamental, the manager said, his voice echoing. They predate our systems. We are required by the original charter to grant access to any Sinclair heir who holds a registered key. This way." He led them to a circular chamber, its walls lined with massive, steel-bound safes. In the center stood a single, towering mechanism of brass and steel. It looked less like a vault and more like a work of art. "Vault GM," the manager announced. "Registered 1985, keyhole center, tumbler sequence top." He gestured to a complex array of 12 dials, numbered 1 through 12. "As per the charter," the manager said, "we must now withdraw. You may take as long as you need." He bowed and retreated, the heavy door hissing shut behind them, leaving the three of them alone. "This is it," Julian whispered, his hands visibly shaking. He was no longer the cold CEO. He was a grandson at the end of a long pilgrimage. Arya stepped forward. She looked at Arthur. "You see this, Arthur? This is real, this craftsmanship, this history. This is what your father tried to erase." She inserted the small brass skeleton key into the central lock. It clicked, a satisfying, heavy sound. "Now," Julian said. "The melody, the sequence." Arya looked at the 12 dials. "It's the tone row, the intervals. C, F, E flat." He wasn't just a genius, he was a romantic. He made his vault a song. She began to turn the dials, one by one, recreating the mathematical intervals of the tune. Click. Dial 1 to C. Click. Dial 2 to F. Click. Dial 3 to E flat. She worked meticulously, her musician's ear and mind perfectly in sync. Arthur watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. The tumblers. The end. With the 12th dial, a deep, resonant thunk echoed through the chamber. A series of massive gears behind a reinforced glass plate began to turn. With the slow, inexorable grace of a glacier, the 5-ton steel door began to swing open. A puff of dry, stale air emerged. The three of them peered into the darkness. It was a simple 10x10 room, lined with shelving. And on a central pedestal, under a single, low-wattage bulb that flickered to life, sat a single, metal document box. Julian Thorne stepped forward, his breathing ragged. He touched the box as if it were a holy relic. He opened it. Inside, sitting on velvet, was a stack of documents. On top was a simple 2-page contract. "Partnership agreement," the header read, "between Richard Pierce and Gabriel Mercer." It was signed by both, dated 1984. Beneath it was a 50-page document filled with equations and diagrams, culminating in a blueprint for the PGD Alpha chip. It was titled Patent Zero, a predictive quantum algorithm, and it was notarized and dated 1983, a full 2 years before Richard Pierce filed his own patent. This was it. The smoking gun, the birth certificate of Pierce Global Dynamics, and the death warrant. "He did it," Julian breathed, tears streaming down his face. "He actually did it. He saved it all." He turned, his face a mask of triumph and grief, and held the documents up to Arthur. "It's over, Pierce," he said, his voice echoing. "Your name is Mudd. Your company is mine." Arthur staggered, leaning against the vault door for support. He was finished. There was no lawyer, no sum of money, that could fight this. This was not an injunction. This was an execution. "Arya," he croaked, turning to his wife. "Arya, please, think of our life, the foundation, the charities, the good we've done." "The good?" Arya replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "The good built on the corpse of this man's family? The good that bought you the right to humiliate me, to ignore me, to treat me like another acquisition." I can change," he stammered. We'll give him half the company, a settlement. Just don't let him do this." Arya looked from her weeping, broken husband to the triumphant, vengeful grandson. She saw two sides of the same coin. One man obsessed with keeping his stolen empire, the other obsessed with burning it to the ground. She thought of the 100,000 employees. She thought of the name Sinclair, a name of bankers, yes, but also of builders. No, Arya said. Both men looked at her, confused. No? Julian said, his victory faltering. Arya stepped into the vault. She looked at the documents, at the empty space where the box had sat. You're right, Julian, she said. This is your grandfather's legacy. It's yours, by blood and by right. But it's also more than that. It's a key piece of modern technology. It's the livelihood of an entire city. You can't just liquidate it. Watch me, Julian said, his eyes hard. Justice demands it. That's not justice, Arya said. That's a temper tantrum with a $100 billion price tag. My family built things. Your grandfather built things. The only person in this room who destroys things is him. She pointed at Arthur. Are you going to be him? Julian's face contorted. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting a real look to the end. A real future. You don't want to destroy PGD. You want to run it. You want to reclaim it. You're brilliant. Your company is innovative. PGD is a bloated, stagnant giant. It needs a new mind. It needs its rightful mind. She turned to Arthur. And you are going to give it to him. What? Arthur said. This is the deal, Arya said, taking the documents from Julian's hand. She was now truly in control. We do not go to the press. We do not file this. Filing this destroys the value. Instead, we call an emergency meeting of the PGD board. Arthur, you will announce your immediate retirement. You will nominate a new CEO. Who? Arthur pleaded. Arya smiled, a cold, sharp smile he had never seen before. Julian Thorne, you're not just going to give him your company. You're going to merge with it. Helios Innovations will acquire Pierce Global Dynamics. Mr. Thorne will be the CEO and chairman of the new combined entity. A merger? Julian scoffed. My $30 billion company acquires his $100 billion one? The board will never approve it. They will, Arya said, when Arthur and I, as the two largest shareholders, vote for it, and when Arthur's recommendation is supported by the fact that the alternative, she held up Patent 0, is the immediate and total annihilation of their stock value. They will approve it. It will be unanimous. Arthur saw the trap. He wouldn't just be ruined. He would be erased. His name, his company, everything. And me? Arthur asked, his voice pathetic. You? Arya looked at him. You will have your shares in the new company. You will be wealthy. But you will be silent. You will have no title, no board seat, no power. You will, for the first time in your life, be nothing. You will be the man in the rain, watching the limousine drive by. It was a brilliant, brutal, and perfect solution. It saved the company. It saved the employees. It restored the legacy. And it delivered the most precise, karmic justice imaginable. Julian Thorne stared at her, his anger giving way to stunned admiration. He had come to blow up a building. She was handing him the keys to the city. And what do you get, Arya? Julian asked. Arya picked up the empty document box. My freedom. She turned to her husband. Our life. It's over, Arthur. The Tesla emeralds are on your desk. You can sell them to pay the lawyers for the merger. I'm keeping the music box. She looked at the small, worthless gift. The gift he had mocked as kindling. It had, in the end, been worth more than his company. It had been the lever that toppled his entire world and the foundation for a new one. The 48 hours that followed were a blur of high-stakes, high-tension corporate theatre. Arthur Pierce, a man broken, moved like a puppet. Aria, his wife, and Julian Thorne, his executioner, pulled the strings. The emergency board meeting for Pierce Global Dynamics was called for 8 a.m. Monday. The 12 board members, titans of industry themselves, including the smug Marcus Vance, filed into the 80th floor boardroom, grumbling about the secrecy. "Arthur, what is this?" Marcus demanded. "This stunt with Helios is costing us. You need to crush this Thorne character." Arthur Pierce, pale and drawn, walked to the head of the table. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a defendant. Aria sat at his right hand, not behind him, but beside him. Julian Thorne sat at his left. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his voice a dry rasp. "Thank you for coming. There has been a significant development, one that concerns the very foundation of this company." He explained nothing. He simply introduced Julian Thorne. Then he introduced a team of lawyers, led by Aria's own Sinclair family attorney, who had been flown in from Switzerland. "A document has come to light," Aria said, her voice cutting through the confused murmurs. "The original founding document of this company's core technology, Patent Zero." She had the document projected onto the massive screen, the signatures of Gabriel Mercer and Richard Pierce. The date. The room went absolutely silent. Marcus Vance looked like he had seen a ghost. "This document," Aria continued, "proves unequivocally that the PGD Alpha patent, the patent on which this entire $100 billion company is built, is fraudulent. Chaos, shouting, accusations. "This is a fake!" one board member yelled. "It has already been authenticated by 3 independent forensic experts," Aria's lawyer replied smoothly. "It is genuine, and Mr. Thorne, as Gabriel Mercer's sole heir, is its legal owner." "If this gets out," Marcus Vance whispered, his face ashen, "we're not just ruined. We're liable. We'll be in jail." "Precisely," Julian Thorne spoke for the first time. "As of this moment, every asset you have is built on stolen property. You are all facing shareholder lawsuits that will strip you bare." He let the terror sink in for a full 10 seconds. "However," Julian continued, "we are proposing an alternative to total annihilation. A restructuring. Pierce Global Dynamics will be acquired by Helios Innovations. It will be a stock-for-stock merger, preserving the company's structure, its employees, and its contracts." "Acquired? By you?" a board member scoffed. "Your company is a fraction of our size." "Our company," Julian countered, "is the one with the legal intellectual property. Yours is the one that's a house of cards. Therefore, I will be the new CEO and chairman of the merged entity. Arthur Pierce," he gestured to the broken man, "is stepping down, effective immediately." It was a hostile takeover, executed not with money, but with a single 40-year-old truth. "And," Arthur mumbled, I recommend this course of action. I will be voting my 30% stake, and Aria will be voting her 15% stake in favor of the merger. That's 45% of the vote. The rest of you can either join us, or you can explain to the Wall Street Journal tomorrow morning why your net worth is now 0. The vote was, as Aria had predicted, unanimous. It was a bloodbath, a corporate execution. Marcus Vance, who had laughed at Aria's gift, was the first to second the motion, his voice trembling. By noon, it was done. The press release went out. Pierce Global Dynamics and Helios Innovations announce historic merger. Julian Thorne to lead. New Helios Mercer Global. The name Pierce was gone, erased. That evening, Aria returned to the penthouse. The staff was gone. The rooms were silent. Arthur was standing by the glass wall, staring at the city he no longer owned. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. The $5 million Tesla emeralds were on the table, next to the brown paper and twine the music box had come in. "You did this," he whispered. "No, Arthur," Aria said, walking past him. She went to her studio and began placing her canvases into a portfolio. "Your father did this. You were just an accessory. You were so busy polishing his statue, you never bothered to look at the rotten wood it was standing on." "And you?" he sneered, a flash of the old Arthur. "You're no saint. You're taking your shares. You're walking away one of the richest women in the world, all because of a lucky purchase." Aria stopped packing. She turned to him. "You still don't get it, do you? Even now. You think I did this for the money?" She walked up to him, closer than she had been in years. "I didn't care about the money, Arthur. I had money. What I didn't have was a voice. I didn't have respect. I was a charming hobby, a naive woman who bought trinkets." She picked up the small wooden music box from her work table. "You asked me why I bought this. You, Marcus, all your friends. You see things and you ask, what is it worth? I see things and I ask, what is its story? I bought this because it was beautiful, because it was broken, but it still played its song, because it felt real in a way that nothing else in this penthouse, including you, ever has." She held it up. This is just wood and gears, but it was a symbol. Your father stole a man's life's work. He left him with nothing but a box, and in the end, that box was enough. The truth. It has a way of waiting. It's patient, and in the end it always wins. "What will you do now?" he asked, his voice small. "I don't know," Aria said. "I'm going to travel. I'm going to paint. I'm going to be Aria Sinclair. Not Mrs. Pierce, not a trophy. Just me." She walked to the door, carrying her art portfolio and the small music box. "Don't," Arthur said, a note of panic in his voice. "Aria, don't leave me. I have nothing." Aria stopped at the elevator, her hand on the call button. She looked back at the richest, poorest man in New York, a billionaire with nothing but a penthouse and a glass of whiskey. "Yes, you do, Arthur," she said. "You have the Tesla emeralds. You can sell them. You'll have 5 million, she paused. "It's more than Gabriel Mercer had." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, and as the doors closed, a new, quiet melody began to play. It was the sound of her own life, finally beginning. 1 year later. The tower was the same, but the name on it was different. Helios Mercer Global, HMG, shone in clean, white letters against the New York skyline. The building itself felt different. The Arctic white marble in the lobby had been replaced with warm, reclaimed wood and living green walls. Julian Thorne, CEO, stood in his office, Arthur's old office. But it too was changed. The massive, intimidating desk was gone, replaced by a circular collaboration table. The walls were covered in whiteboards, filled with equations, the same chaotic, brilliant scrawls that must have filled his grandfather's notebooks. HMG was thriving. Julian's visionary leadership, combined with PGD's old resources, had resulted in a breakthrough in synthetic biology. The stock was up 30%. The employees, who had been terrified of the change, were now energized. Julian had instituted a new policy. 10% of all company profits were diverted to a new foundation. The Mercer Foundation for Ethical Innovation was dedicated to funding and protecting young inventors, the Gabriels of the world, ensuring their ideas wouldn't be stolen by the Richards. There was a knock on his door. His assistant peered in. "Ms. Sinclair is here to see you." "Send her in." Julian smiled. Arya Sinclair entered. She looked transformed. The haunted, suppressed sadness was gone. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a silk blouse. Her hair was cut in a stylish, modern bob. She was radiant. "Julian," she said, clasping his hand, "the new lobby is stunning." "A bit of life," he smiled. "Something my grandfather would have liked. Thank you for coming. I wanted you to be the first to see this." He led her to a small, quiet alcove in his office. On a simple, elegant pedestal, encased in museum-quality glass, sat the music box. "I had it restored," Julian said. "It belongs here, the founding document of HMG." "It's beautiful," Arya said, touching the glass. "It's happy to be home." "It is," Julian said, "and so is the other piece." He gestured to a framed document on the wall. It was Patent Zero. "It's a reminder," he said, "of what we're built on and what we're not." "And Arthur?" Arya asked, her voice soft. Julian's face tightened slightly. "He's in London, I think. He sold his shares, as we knew he would. He's still incredibly wealthy. But he has no power, no name. I hear he's quiet." "Good," Arya said. "Quiet is good for him." "And you?" Julian asked, turning to her. "Your exhibit at the MoMA. It was a sensation. The Mechanical Heart. All based on musical theory. It was brilliant, Arya." "I found my voice," Arya smiled. "I'm opening a gallery in the village, not far from Curio and Cog, actually. I'm funding young artists, a different kind of innovation." "So we both found our way," Julian said. "We did," Arya said. She looked at the music box. "You know, he never understood. Arthur. He thought the box was valuable because it contained the secret, because it held the key to the vault." "He was wrong," Julian said. "He was wrong," Arya agreed. "The box itself wasn't the value. The secret wasn't the point. The point was that he saw it and thought it was worthless. He saw me and thought I was worthless. He mocked the one thing, the one person who was willing to see the truth. The value wasn't in the box, Julian. The value was in the act of looking." She smiled, a full, genuine smile. "The value was in seeing what others dismiss." Julian nodded, understanding completely. "Finem respice. Look to the end." "Exactly," Arya said. "The end of one story is always the beginning of another." She turned and walked out of the office, past the patent of the man she had vindicated, leaving the music box, no longer a time bomb, but a cornerstone, to play its song in the heart of the new, honest empire it had built. And that's the story of how a worthless $50 music box brought a $100 billion empire to its knees. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story about the danger of arrogance. It shows us that true value, the things that really matter, are often hidden in plain sight, dismissed by people who only know how to read a price tag. Arthur Pierce had everything, but in the end, he had nothing. Arya Pierce had been treated like a possession, but she held the key to everyone's future. It reminds us that the truth can be buried for decades, but it never, ever rots. It just waits. What did you think of Arya's final decision? Was it justice, or was it mercy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you loved this story of karmic justice and hidden truths, please show your support. It helps us so much. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and you don't want to miss what happens next.